And when I think about that, and thank you for giving that answer. When I think about a lot of the arguments that is happening in our young generation based off of TikTok, YouTube, and just
Right.
IG, and then you got individuals who just came to the faith, and now all of a sudden they're like scholars because they seen a bunch of YouTube videos, and now they
Right.
they place themselves on a platform to be influencers on social media,
Hmm.
and then now there's this big argument among the young generation about which translation to use. So now it's either, oh, I'm King James only. You have this King James only section, and then you have the NLT, whatever it is, right? And I've seen, Islam and other religions use that for their advantage, to argue as an apologist from, defending the fact that, oh, Christians can't even get along because they don't even know what translation is true. What would you say to something like that?
Well, I'd tell people who are Muslims that they used to have different translations too, but they decided to burn them and get rid of them
Yeah.
and have one standard text. But uh, the various translations really don't make a difference in understanding the message of Scripture. It may, in certain verses, give us, a little opportunity to think through issues. But I'm talking about translations, where you're talking about either word for word rather than thought for thought.
Mm-hmm.
We have paraphrases, which, like the Message,
Mm-hmm.
which it's nice to read it like in a devotional way, for instance, but don't take it because it's not necessarily exactly what the Scripture would say.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful to distinguish those type of
Mm-hmm.
things. But uh, for instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls, since the 1950s, every translation that's come out has taken into account the evidence from the text given to us by the Dead Sea
Mm-hmm.
Scrolls. So we learn about this. There was always a Greek translation of the Old Testament 250 years before Jesus even appeared. So translations existed. In his day, there was an Aramaic paraphrase of the Bible called the Targum. And these Targums from around the first century BC were like our paraphrases in ways.
Mm-hmm.
But like where Isaiah 53 will say, uh, behold, the servant of the Lord, it will say, behold, the servant of the Lord, King Messiah. They'll
Mm-hmm.
add things
Mm-hmm.
that they understood what this passage talked about. And that's greatly debated within
Yeah.
Judaism today. But the Judaism before Jesus came
Mm-hmm.
had no debate on that. They
Mm-hmm.
state those things. But, when it comes to the scriptures itself, God's preserved his word, uh, even in the translations.
Mm-hmm.
So the King James was a translation, and while people don't necessarily understand it, they'll go like to the 1611 King James or something.
Yeah.
But I have a 1612 King James I own,
Yeah.
and it's called the He Bible because they mistranslated something, and
Mm-hmm.
instead of in Ruth where it says she went into the town, they put HEE, he went into.
Oh wow.
So it doesn't affect the meaning
Yeah.
that much unless But I'm just saying there are errors in the 16, and they had the Apocrypha in the
Mm-hmm.
one I had too.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's a lot of changes that have happened. And the King James was simply a translation. We had other English translations before that, Tyndale and Wycliffe and things like this. So the importance is that you get a translation that accurately reflects the original meaning.
Mm.
So a word for word. King James is one that does that. New American Standard does that. The ESV does that, and many others.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to get one where you can study from and know that you're, as much as possible, getting to the original
Yeah.
meaning.
Yeah. And the way that they just, of course, the way they lay it
Right.
out and they interpret the scriptures.
But it's not a debate. In Jesus' day, and this may sound strange, but he used various translations too.
Mm-hmm.
We see from things he said, he had maybe a Hebrew text that was more like the Greek Septuagint, the
Mm-hmm.
translation. We know he often referred to Targums. We know that he had a Hebrew text he's reading from in Nazareth, but there were other Hebrew texts. I'll tell you, it's interesting. In Luke records that Jesus in Nazareth reads from Isaiah,
Mm-hmm.
and it's Isaiah 61. the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about heal the sick and give sight to the blind and release prisoners from this. And then he closes the book and hands it back to the attendant. But then that's in Luke 4. In Luke 7, we have Jesus saying something to those who come from John the Baptizer, asking,
Mm-hmm.
"Are you the one?"
Yeah.
And he says, "Tell John what you have seen." And he quotes Isaiah
Yeah.
61.
Mm-hmm.
He says, the lame walk, the blind
Mm-hmm.
see, this and the dead are raised.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Wow. That's not in the one he just
Mm-hmm.
read in Nazareth.
Mm-hmm.
We come to the Dead Sea Scrolls and we find their citation of Isaiah
It
61,
has that in
and
it.
it has raised the dead
Yeah.
in it.
Mm-hmm.
So we know there was a Hebrew manuscript that had that. So
Mm-hmm.
he used various texts as well. He just looked for the one that had the right meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It was, after all, his word. He knows what preserves it best and
Mm-hmm.
reflects it. And that's the job today for real in-depth students of the word, to try to understand the text and to find the correct meaning
Mm-hmm.
and the interpretation. And there are rules for doing that. It's not that hard, but it does take some
Some
study.
time.
Mhm.
Okay.